So, when I was Eastern Orthodox, right after Divine Liturgy, we would often get together in a nearby building. And after the service, we would all have a meal and conversate and fellowship and talk theology, usually. And had some really fascinating conversations there. But I remember early on one of those conversations was with one of the parishioners there, and they were asking me, why didn't I go to Anglicanism, specifically to the Church of England or ACNA? And I explained to them I actually attended ACNA, but I never formally converted to Anglicanism and ACNA. And one of the big reasons was I struggled with the question of women's ordination that they allowed for at the time and still do allow for. So they had, for example, women priests. And I just said, look, if I'm talking about an apostolic church and I'm talking about the historic faith, I just don't see how a communion that has this can be something apostolic in nature, can be a historical church. And so for me, that was kind of a breaking point. That was a dividing line. And so I told him, yeah, that was kind of a deal breaker. And he surprised me with a point by saying, well, in Eastern Orthodoxy, the question of women's ordination to the priesthood is not yet settled. And I thought, I don't know about that. That sounds odd. Now, in fairness, many Eastern Orthodox don't take that position, and they'll say, "Look, it's not settled." They will say, "I'm sorry, it is settled. It's not open for debate." But I did come across a few people who were indicating it was open. I believe there were some videos back in the day of Metropolitan Callistus Ware kind of talking about that. I actually had the honor of interviewing him before he passed away. We didn't talk specifically about that question, but that was a position that he maintained, that it wasn't necessarily settled in Eastern Orthodoxy. And I also checked out this book by Father John Erickson, a priest and also Eastern Orthodox canon lawyer. It's called The Challenge of Our Past. And he says outright in the section on the priesthood and the patristic tradition, he says, quote, "We must admit quite simply, while the fathers have blessed us with a multifaceted yet coherent teaching on the priesthood, they have not given us a complete and altogether satisfactory answer to the question of the ordination of women." And so for him, it appears that the question was still relatively open in Eastern Orthodoxy. Again, there are Orthodox who will oppose that and they'll argue differently. So there's different views here among various Eastern Orthodox. And because of that conversation, I've been very fascinated with the question of female priests in Anglicanism, in the potential for it in Eastern Orthodoxy, those conversations in Catholicism with Ordinatio Sacerdotalis, conversations about the female diaconate, its historical roots, what it is, what it wasn't, both in Catholicism, Eastern Orthodoxy, Oriental Orthodoxy, all of that stuff. So I've been looking a lot into it, and I want to talk a little bit about each one of these communions on this particular situation with women deaconesses, especially because of something I just came across. So somebody shared with me yesterday some images of a lady who is claiming to be an Eastern Orthodox deaconess in training and is posting videos of her preaching sermons. I'll show it to you, but there's a little bit of a question mark on it. Is this real? Is this just some kind of AI thing? Is this an elaborate hoax? Is the person real, but it's all staged and she's not actually in training? There's a lot of questions on this. And so I kind of want to look at her situation specifically. And then after that, we're going to talk about some Orthodox jurisdictions, Eastern Orthodox jurisdictions that already have Eastern Orthodox deaconesses, Oriental Orthodox, some of them who have deaconesses, and the conversation on women deaconesses in Catholicism. So we're going to touch on that as well, but kind of towards the end. First of all, I want to just look at her situation. And before we dive into that, I want to remind you, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button if you appreciate the content of this channel. So let me show you what I came across. This was shared on the social media. I'll share my screen so you can follow along with me Here we go. Now they're saying this lady is Barbara Gulina, and this is from her account. And here is a screenshot of the video of the homily or sermon that she claims she was preaching, her first sermon. I'll show that video in just a moment. But she says, I've already received so many kind responses, encouragement, and thoughtful feedback from both men and women in the church. Thank you all to who believe in me and continue to support me as I learn to write sermons, preach, and touch people's hearts by speaking God's truth. And so that was shared on September 8th. And if you look at this one, this post just has her holding a candle at an Orthodox parish in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And she says, as I was holding the candle as a candle bearer during the liturgy, I prayed to God that my presence brings joy, beauty, and inspiration to others. And some are saying that this has nothing to do with like deaconess training. It's just kind of like a altar server thing. And you will find female altar servers in Eastern Orthodoxy in some jurisdictions. That's not necessarily, female diaconate though. So I said, okay, I need to look more into this. And so I did some digging and I found her Facebook. The Facebook page, by the way, has a very long article where allegedly she wrote this at the end, Barbara Gulina. And if you start to read it, it's kind of odd because the author of this, presumably her, at least it's claiming to be her, says things like, as I was serving during the sermon, it was expressed that the Holy Spirit, which fills all things, she is joyful, playful, and beautiful, the life of God herself. So kind of some weird stuff going on there with feminine language for God, calling the Holy Spirit she. Again, I don't know for sure if that's really her article because it's on somebody else's Facebook page, but then she's tagged as the author. So I'm assuming it's authentic. She hasn't come out and said, no, this isn't real. But as I was looking at her Facebook page, I did come across this sermon, as she calls it. And it's very short. It's only 5 minutes long. And so let's maybe watch it together. And I want you to pay attention to a few things here. I want you to tell me what you are observing and what you're not observing here, right? Pay attention to the setting specifically. All right, let's go ahead and watch it together. Somebody said there's no audio. Thank you for alerting me. Let me go ahead and share it one more time and enable that audio. Let's try it one more.
In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. The transfiguration of Christ means that we can now be transfigured as well. Christ invites all human persons, including women, to shine. At the Transfiguration, Jesus Christ takes his disciples and journeys up a mountain. There, he reveals himself to them. Just like Moses when he encountered the divine on Mount Sinai, Jesus radiated light. There he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light.
Are you noticing anything yet? Something odd. Something should be standing out here telling you something's not right. I mean, aside from the female preaching part, right? Okay. Pay attention.
Celebration of the Transfiguration, we are called to participate in this light. Christ was both fully divine and fully human at the same time. God becoming human in Christ allows for humans to partake of divinity and become like God. But what I find we often do not speak about is how even in our earthly presentation here within our church, we seem to denigrate the beauty and radiance of women. and how the limitations that we often place on them are dulling that shine. For example, women will often be told to cover up, to crucify the flesh, and engage in certain forms of harsh asceticism, to self-sacrifice, to stay modest, humble. We often encourage women who are called to diverse forms of ministries to give up on their hopes and aspirations, often using religious language to justify the dulling of this shine, sometimes erasing it completely. Yet we hear in the Transfiguration story, Christ took the disciples up the mountain. During the moment of Transfiguration, Moses and Elijah are with Christ, and tradition suggests that they represent the law and the prophets, which are now fulfilled in Jesus Christ. Old ideas are transformed. They are transfigured in the light of Christ, and Christ's transfiguration reveals what has always been true about him. And therefore, we discover what has always been true about us, including women, all along. For me personally, this discovery, this moment of transfiguration, came through my daughter.
I think you get the point, right? It's only 6 minutes long, but having gone through 2 minutes already, it looks like everybody there in the chat is getting it, right? And Father has some really good observations here. He says the royal doors are closed. Bingo! Spot on, Father. Well done. That was one thing, right? Royal doors are closed. The lamps are not lit. This doesn't appear to be during any kind of divine liturgy. He says, so I'm guessing it's not a homily, strictly speaking. Not only that, but everybody else is noting that there's no voices in the background. And they're pointing out, it sounds like she's in an empty church. I don't hear anyone there. Not a single cough or sound. Well done, y'all. Very well done. Yes, this particular video does look like it's in a setting that doesn't appear to be in a divine liturgy. And for all I know, nobody was there except her and the camera. Now, maybe I'm wrong, right? But I just don't see any evidence that this is during a divine liturgy or that this is, a populated congregation or something like that. And from what I understand, some people have told me that this is the daughter of a priest who, um, wants to promote women's ordination to the diaconate, but the father, the priest isn't necessarily in agreement, and the bishop certainly isn't in agreement, and the bishop has been made aware. I don't know if that's true or not. I haven't been able to confirm that. That's just what I've been told. If that's true, maybe it could be that she just had access to this because her father is maybe a priest and she just had access to the empty church outside of the divine liturgy and just recorded herself and posted on Facebook. That could be what's going on. I pray for her. I hope that God blesses her, gives her mercy, and gives her guidance, helps clarify any confusions on her part on this particular conversation and question. So I do want to point that out and be sensitive to that. There could be something going on there. There could be a dynamic there that maybe we're not fully aware of. And so to me, from what I can tell, I haven't seen any kind of evidence of an official blessing on part of any Eastern Orthodox jurisdiction in her particular case for this. She did say on January 11th that she began her preparation for the diaconate, but I haven't seen any evidence of that from, either a priest or from a bishop. And so coupling that with the video image that I just saw, it's just not adding up, right? It doesn't seem like it's authentic or really happening. So I believe she's a real person. Don't get me wrong. I don't think that she's AI, but I think this is kind of staged and she's not actually part of some program. Be that as it may, I do want to have the conversation about women preaching, Eastern Orthodox Deaconesses, because somebody did share this right underneath that post, right? Somebody said, imagine this was your first time walking into a ROCOR church. Well, first of all, I don't know if that church is actually ROCOR or not, but maybe it is. But as I pointed out, it doesn't appear that it's during a homily or with a populated congregation. Um, but then, other people have responded back to that and said, well, imagine, you walk into your average Novus Ordo and see some of the wild things going on there. You walk in and see a Pride Mass or something like that, right? So some people are trying to use this as kind of a cheap shot against Eastern Orthodoxy. Um, and this person commented and said that Jenny Constantino, um, who's a popular Eastern Orthodox author, shared her social media that says, gave the sermon this morning, St. Mary Antiochian Orthodox Church in Omaha, Nebraska. Father Don Hawk is in the background. I don't know if that really is during a sermon. It might be during the liturgy. Maybe it's after it. I don't know. But she's saying that it's her delivering a sermon. So yeah, you might find some odd cases here and there where a lady is preaching a sermon, but I don't know if that's actually normative. However, we do know of cases of Eastern Orthodox deaconesses being revived in Eastern Orthodoxy. I've spoken about this many times on the show. Here's about 4 or 5 deaconesses being ordained in the Alexandrian Patriarchate in 2017. Here's another one who more recently in 2024, Angelique Molin, who is a Greek Orthodox deaconess. Well, they say she's Greek Orthodox, but I believe she's under the Alexandrian Patriarchate. So here she's distributing communion. Elsewhere, you could see her here during the Divine Liturgy, doing the litany, and so she has a pretty active role during the liturgy. And this is from an article that I covered way back in the day, last year. Orthodox Church ordains female deacon, and there was a little bit of a conversation of what kind of ordination was this. Is this a non-sacramental ordination or sacramental? Well, I looked into it, and everything that I saw points to the idea that this was sacramental in nature. But I didn't see anything like 100% conclusive, because there's no statement from the jurisdiction saying this is sacramental. But what I'm saying is, what we could tell, the language used, the prayers used, it appeared that this is seen as sacramental in nature. And she's performing all of the same functions during the liturgy as a male sacramentally ordained deacon. Okay, so we've seen that before. This is the St. Phoebe Center for the Deaconess. This is an Eastern Orthodox group that wants to see a revival of more Eastern Orthodox deaconesses. And by the way, that lady that we saw at the very beginning, the lady who's saying she's a deaconess in training, I did verify that she's done some work with the St. Phoebe Center, which at least told me that she's a real person, right? She's not somebody made up an AI, because I am aware St. Phoebe Center is a real thing. But here they point out that in 2004, the Greek Orthodox Church voted to revive the Eastern Orthodox diaconate for women. They say the Holy Synod of the Church of Greece has decided to restore the order of the diaconate for women under the leadership of Archbishop Christodoulos of Athens. The decision was taken at the October 8th, 2004 meeting, which brought together 64 bishops from throughout Greece. Now, to my knowledge, though, they haven't, in any of their jurisdictions, to my knowledge, they haven't ordained any yet, but they did approve it. I don't know if something caused a delay. I don't know what's going on there, but there is that historical decision. And also, you can come across information like this. In 1907, a Russian Orthodox Church commission reported the presence of deaconesses in every Georgian parish. The popular 20th century Orthodox Saint Nectarios, that they have a movie about not too long ago. Was it Man of God, I think? Saint Nectarios ordained 2 women deacons in 1911, and up to the 50s, a few Greek Orthodox nuns became monastic deaconesses. So they talk a little bit about how we've seen this even in more recent times in various Eastern Orthodox jurisdictions. Okay, so it is a thing, but that doesn't necessarily mean that this lady that we saw at the beginning, that's a legitimate deal. And from what I can tell, in my estimation, that kind of looks more like a staged hoax than it looks like anything authentic. Um, Now, I do want to briefly talk about this in Catholicism, right? We've seen ordinatio sacerdotales that indicates women cannot be ordained priests. However, and the document uses very ex cathedra language. Like if you look at what ex cathedra is according to Vatican I, it checks all the boxes of papal infallibility. And the document itself does say that it's already has already been taught infallibly by the ordinary and universal magisterium that women cannot be ordained to the priesthood. We saw just very recently Cardinal Timothy Radcliffe challenge that, and he says that no, actually we can have women priests, and he's not the only cardinal who's been saying that. Very high-ranking cardinals have been very public about it. There were some words in the dubia response from Pope Francis to Cardinal Burke. This slightly gave an inch to the idea of women priesthood, even though Pope Francis was opposed to it, as I've often pointed out. He did kind of leave a crack open for it in his response to the dubia that Cardinal Burke submitted to him privately. Much more can be said there. Be that as it may, some of these very high-ranking cardinals are very openly saying, actually, this isn't an infallible teaching, and we can still have this, which I've pointed out. If this is not an infallible teaching, what is the point of the magisterium? Because it's using really infallible language, and it's saying it's infallible. And if it turns out that's not infallible, then it can tell you one day that something's infallible, and the next day it can change its mind. Like, that doesn't seem reliable. So I don't know how these cardinals are getting away with saying that. And we saw that Pope Leo, instead of disciplining them, actually put one of them front and center at the extraordinary consistory, which, again, sends mixed signals, in my opinion. Now, we've seen Pope Leo asked about the conversation and the question of women's ordination. That document, Ordinatio Sacerdotales, deals with women's ordination to the priesthood. It says nothing about the diaconate. Nothing about the diaconate. So a lot of people have capitalized on that and have tried to maybe push for the first step of restoring women deaconesses in the Catholic Church, because there have been historically for over 1,000 years women deaconesses in Catholicism. There's been a huge debate on whether or not they were sacramentally ordained, or if this was some kind of non-ordained, non-sacramental ordination, some kind of non-sacramental diaconate. Big conversation surrounding that. But the fact that there have been deaconesses, that's just a historical fact. But a lot of people have wanted to maybe try to revive them as a stepping stone to maybe lead to other things like the, female priesthood in the Catholic Church. And asked about this conversation, we saw in September, Pope Leo kind of weighed in on the question of women's ordination. And he says, at the moment, he says this in English and we have it on video, so it's not like a mistranslation. I, at the moment, don't have an intention of changing the teaching of the church on the topic. So he's not even identifying it as a discipline. He's saying it's a teaching, and he indicates the teaching can change, but he just doesn't have the mind to do so at the moment. He says his reasoning for it, not because of theological challenges, not because it can't be done, but rather he says, I think there are some previous questions that have to be asked. And namely, his main contention is, well, if we have a problem of clericalism with men, aren't we just going to transfer that problem onto women? We need to address the issue of clericalism first before we can have the conversation. So it's not the kind of response that you would expect, where you would expect them to say, no, you can't do that. That's completely contrary to tradition. The idea here for him is, well, practically there's some difficulties for it, but it could potentially change. He just is not at the moment of the mind of doing so. And you can see that very clearly if you just read the whole thing. In fact, if you look at the context, it says, "For most people, certainly the understanding that the role of women in the church has to continue to develop. I think in that sense there was a positive response. I hope to continue in the footsteps of Pope Francis, including in appointing women to some leadership roles at different levels in the church's life, recognizing the gifts that women have that can contribute to the life of the church in many ways." This is again what he says in response to a question about women's ordination. The topic becomes a hot button issue about the specific question about ordination, so women's ordination. What the Synod had spoken about specifically was the ordination, perhaps of women deacons, which has been a question that has been studied for many years now. There's been different commissions appointed by different popes to say, what can we do about this? I think that will continue to be an issue, so he doesn't think this is going away. I, at the moment, don't have an intention of changing the teaching of the church. Okay, so from that, we gather the idea that the Pope believes this is something that could change. It's something that may happen. He's just not of the mind to do so for practical purposes right now. Maybe he will later. Maybe it will be the next Pope. Maybe it will be the Pope after that. But I believe it's, it looks like it's going to continue to be an issue, as he says, at the very least, right? It's not going away. There was, by the way, a commission report that just came out after this. And as I showed to y'all, as I went through it, it still leaves the question open. A lot of people misreported it and tried to pretend that it indicates that the door's shut on it. This is part of the dishonesty, in my opinion, of some Catholic media outlets and also secular outlets. Very dishonest or incompetent. Because if you read through the actual report, it does leave room for the idea that there could be a restoration of women deaconesses, and it does not settle the question of whether or not it would be considered sacramental or not. So we reviewed that, already did a show on it, not going to rehearse that here, but the point is that didn't shut the door on the matter, and it doesn't appear it's going to be shut anytime soon. It looks like it's going to continue to be an issue. Now, why do I say that? Well, because I saw some Catholics on social media being a little triumphalistic in trying to point out the situation with the women deaconess allegedly in training. And they were saying, yeah, this is what happens in Eastern Orthodoxy, come home to Rome kind of thing. And I'm just left thinking, guys, this is dishonest. Just don't do that. Don't do that. Yeah, right now in Eastern Orthodoxy, you actually do have some women deaconesses, right? And you can't point to women deaconesses right now in Catholicism. But as Pope Leo said, this is going to continue to be an issue. So what happens if in 10 years there's women deaconesses? Well, you can no longer dunk on Eastern Orthodox with that argument, right? So probably best to go ahead and retire that one right now, because it could be coming down the pike. So maybe, come up with a different angle here. It's kind of like another meme that I saw yesterday. And it was this meme of Cartman. Y'all remember Cartman from South Park? I hope y'all don't know who Cartman from South Park is, but unfortunately, y'all probably do. Unfortunately, I do. Cartman from South Park, they showed a GIF of him. A GIF is one of those images that moves, right? And they shared this little meme of him saying, I'll do what I want. Something like that, right? It's been a while since I've done my Cartman voice. So I may have gotten it off a little off there. But the point is, he says, I'll do what I want. And they posted that and said, Protestantism in a nutshell. And I just thought, look, whatever criticisms that could be leveled against Protestantism, this is not the time for Catholics on social media to try to dunk on anybody. Dunking on Orthodox, dunking on Protestants. Stop it. This is no. Don't do it. Don't do it. It's going to get thrown right back in your face. You know why? Because I just watched for the last 10 years numerous Catholics on social media picking and choosing what doctrines they want to hold to. I'm watching Cardinals pick and choose what doctrines they want to hold on to. I'm watching bishops, priests, laity, everyone picking and choosing what Catholic doctrines they want to hold to. I don't like this decision on the death penalty. I'm going to change that. Oh, I love this decision on the death penalty. And I think that what the church used to teach is wrong. And I've seen just all sorts of opinions and perspectives. And I've seen a lot of people picking and choosing. In an age when we just witnessed an insane amount of dissent on part of Catholics, clergy, laity, social media, in real life, now's not the time to try to critique Protestants for buffet behavior, picking and choosing what part of the faith they want to hold to. Whatever criticisms that could be made there, I'm sorry, they're just going to point it right back at you and say, look at how you're picking and choosing yourself, because whoever made that meme, and people who want to usually dunk on Protestants for that, start grilling them about their assent to magisterial teachings, and you'll find out quickly which documents they adhere to and which they don't. And they probably will be of the mind that, the living magisterium we're kind of skeptical of, but the perennial magisterium and the preconciliar magisterium we're all on board with. Look, don't do that, because you're just going to make Catholicism look really bad, and you're going to show there's some hypocrisy here. I do think there are some fundamental differences between Catholicism and Protestantism on this particular point, but I think that kind of attempt to dunk on Protestants with this particular point doesn't land very well after what we've just witnessed. So yeah, let's maybe retire that one. One other point, I digress. So we saw her doing what she claimed to be preaching a sermon, right? Again, I'm skeptical if that was actually real, but we did see another meme of another lady in Eastern Orthodoxy preaching a sermon. And so some people ask the question, can you have that in Catholicism? Can the laity preach a sermon? Well, if you look at the USCCB, it has a statement here on lay preaching, Canon 766. So it's going over the Code of Canon Law, Canon 766. And it says, if necessity requires it in certain circumstances, or it seems useful in particular cases, the diocesan bishop can admit lay faithful to preach, to offer spiritual conferences, or give instructions in churches, oratories, and other sacred places within his diocese when he judges it to be the spiritual advantage of the faithful. So, in some cases, laity can preach. They can preach at the pulpit, in a actual church or oratory. However, it does indicate that it cannot take place at the time of the homily. That would be reserved to the sacred ministers. So whatever preaching is authorized, it wouldn't take place at the time of the homily. Maybe it would be after the homily. Maybe it would be at the end of the liturgy. Maybe it would be outside of the liturgy, but it just wouldn't be during the homily. Okay. So do be aware of that for anybody who is wondering about that in Catholicism. All right. That is what I was able to gather on the situation. If you have any more information about it, I would love to hear from you in the comment section. And of course, love to hear your thoughts on all of this, the female diaconate in Catholicism, Eastern Orthodoxy, Oriental Orthodoxy, because some Oriental Orthodox do have women deaconesses already. And so it's a conversation that is fascinating, and love to hear from you in the comment section. Make sure to hit the like button and the subscribe button. That's going to do it for today. God bless you all. Hey, thanks so much for watching. Make sure to subscribe. And if you want to support my work, check me at patreon.com/reason of theology. Also check out my second channel, Knowledge and Wisdom, right here on YouTube.